Today, we're diving into something that's probably crossed your mind, maybe even come up in your own conversations. The idea of women's behavior over men's. Hey everyone, welcome back to Lexicon Bloom. I recently had the most mind-blowing conversation with a philosophy professor, and it profoundly reshaped my understanding of this whole topic. You know, that sense that women act a certain way that gives them an edge or influence in different situations. I went into it with some thoughts, but the professor truly opened my eyes, and I had to share what I learned with you all. The illusion of universality. Why generalizations fall short. The very first and most critical point the professor emphasized was the inherent danger of broadly generalizing about all women's behavior or all men's behavior. They explained that such blanket statements, while seemingly convenient for discussion, often lead us down a misleading path. Think of it this way. When we say all women do X, we're essentially trying to fit a vast, diverse constellation of individuals into a single, restrictive box. This act of essentialism, believing that a group shares a fundamental, unchanging essence, strips away the rich tapestry of individual human experience. The professor eloquently put it, behavior isn't a fixed, predetermined trait tied to gender. It's a dynamic interplay of countless variables. They talked about how our actions are shaped by an incredible mix of factors: our unique genetic predispositions, the specific environment we grow up in, the cultural norms we absorb, which vary wildly from one society to another, and even within the same society across different communities, our personal life experiences, and, crucially, our individual choices and agency. To ignore these layers is to misunderstand human behavior at its core. They also highlighted the concept of intersectionality, even without using the jargon. They explained that a woman's experience in a wealthy urban environment is vastly different from a woman's experience in a rural developing nation, or even an inner-city neighborhood. Their behaviors, their challenges, and their ways of interacting will reflect these distinct realities. So, claiming a universal women's behavior not only simplifies, but actively misrepresents the diverse experiences of half the global population. This initial insight alone was a powerful reframing for me, urging me to always consider the individual and the intricate web of influences that shape them. We often fall into the trap of looking for simple explanations for complex phenomena, but human behavior, especially across something as broad as gender, resists such neat categorization. Every person is a universe of their own experiences and choices, and to reduce them to a generic female or male behavior pattern does a disservice to that profound individuality. Unpacking over a deep dive into power dynamics. Next, we dug into the very phrasing of women's behavior over men's. The professor pointed out that this implies a position of advantage, influence, or even superiority. They pressed me to consider, what exactly does this over signify? Is it a social influence? A relational dynamic? An emotional sway? Or perhaps a perceived strategic advantage in certain contexts? This question forced me to look beyond surface-level observations and into the deeper currents of power. The professor delved into the historical and systemic reality of patriarchy, a social system where men hold primary power and dominate roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. In such systems, which have been prevalent across much of human history, and sadly persist in many forms today, women have often been relegated to subordinate positions. Their roles, responsibilities, and even their acceptable modes of behavior have been narrowly defined, often limiting their agency and public voice. They explained how, in these structures, behaviors traditionally labeled feminine, such as nurturing, empathy, cooperation, and subtle communication, were often valued within the domestic sphere, seen as crucial for family cohesion. Yet, paradoxically, these same traits were frequently dismissed as weaknesses, or unsuited for the public, professional, or political realms, which were often dominated by traits deemed masculine, like assertiveness, competitiveness, and stoicism. This revealed a fascinating double standard. When women did exhibit traits like assertiveness or leadership, they were often met with resistance, labeled as aggressive, bossy, or unfeminine. The professor called this a catch-22. If women acted traditionally feminine, they were deemed weak. If they acted masculine, they were criticized for not conforming to gender expectations. This isn't about one gender's behavior being inherently over another's. It's about how societal expectations create a complex, often restrictive, landscape for how behavior is perceived and rewarded based on gender. It made me realize that what we label as effective or desirable behavior isn't some universal truth, but a construction born from cultural values and power structures. The professor emphasized that these dynamics are often invisible to those who benefit from them, making them even more insidious. It's not about conscious manipulation, but rather a pervasive set of norms that shape who gets to be heard, who gets to lead, and whose contributions are valued. The social construction of gender and behavior, one of the most thought-provoking areas we explored, was the idea that much of what we consider gendered behavior is not innate, but socially constructed. The professor argued that while there are biological differences between sexes, the meaning we ascribe to those differences, and the behaviors we associate with masculinity and femininity, are largely products of culture, education, and societal reinforcement. They explained that from the moment we're born, we're immersed in a world that teaches us what it means to be a boy or a girl. This isn't explicit schooling in a classroom. It's subtle, pervasive lessons from parents, peers, media, and institutions. Boys might be encouraged to be tough and independent, girls to be gentle and cooperative. Toys, clothing, even the adjectives used to describe children, all contribute to this ongoing lesson. This process of socialization shapes our identities and influences the behaviors we adopt. This means that masculine and feminine are not fixed, universal categories. They are fluid, evolving concepts that change over time and across different societies. What was considered manly in the Victorian era might be seen as overly emotional today, and what was womanly in one culture might be alien in another. The professor emphasized that our understanding of gender shapes our expectations of behavior, and these expectations, in turn, influence how individuals perform their gender. So, when we observe patterns of behavior, we're often seeing the results of deep-seated social conditioning, not necessarily inherent predispositions. This was a massive shift in perspective for me, moving from a fixed biological view to a dynamic, culturally influenced understanding. They even brought up how these constructions can create internal conflict when an individual's innate personality doesn't align with their assigned gender roles, leading to psychological distress and a sense of not fitting in. It's a powerful reminder that our societal scripts have real-world impacts on individual well-being. Deeper into communication, strategy, and subtlety, we also delved into the nuances of communication styles. The professor acknowledged that some sociological and psychological research suggests women might, on average, utilize more indirect communication, focus more on relational harmony, and be more attuned to nonverbal cues. But instead of leaving it there, they pushed me to ask, why might these patterns exist? They proposed that these communication styles could be strategic adaptations rather than inherent traits. Imagine a historical context where women had less direct power. In such environments, direct assertion might have been met with dismissal or even punishment. Therefore, developing skills in persuasion through subtlety, building consensus, reading between the lines, and maintaining social harmony could have become vital tools for navigating the world effectively. This isn't about being over men in some manipulative sense. It's about developing different toolkits for influence. When direct power is limited, the professor also highlighted the concept of relational intelligence, the ability to understand and navigate complex social dynamics. If women have historically been positioned as the primary caregivers and relationship managers within families and communities, it's plausible they would develop highly refined skills in this area. These skills might manifest as superior empathy, active listening, or a greater capacity to de-escalate conflict. So, while these behaviors might appear as a power in interpersonal situations, they are often cultivated skills born from specific societal roles and necessities. It made me think about communication not just as talking, but as a complex art of navigating social landscapes. a form of social engineering where different strategies yield different outcomes depending on the context and power dynamics at play. They underscored that these communication patterns are not about inherent superiority, but about navigating complex social structures. Asterisk. The weight of unseen labor, emotional and cognitive burdens. One of the most impactful parts of our conversation was about emotional labor. The professor explained this concept in depth. It's the invisible, often unacknowledged work of managing emotions, one's own and others, to maintain social harmony or fulfill a role. Think about anticipating needs, resolving conflicts, providing comfort, or simply making sure everyone feels heard and cared for. This often falls disproportionately on women. They explained that this isn't just about being nice. It's a significant burden. It drains mental and emotional energy, yet it's rarely compensated or even formally recognized. Philosophically, this raises questions about value and fairness. Why is this essential work, which contributes immensely to the well-being of families and communities, so often invisible and undervalued? The professor argued that it's deeply connected to societal expectations that cast women as primary nurturers and caregivers, making this labor seem natural rather than a societal imposition beyond emotional labor. They also touched upon cognitive labor, or mental load, where women often carry the disproportionate burden of remembering and planning household logistics, appointments, and daily routines. This isn't a behavior over men. It's a form of invisible taxation on women's time and mental capacity. Understanding this layer of unacknowledged work truly deepened my appreciation for the systemic pressures that shape women's daily lives and, by extension, their observable behaviors. The professor connected this to broader theories of justice, emphasizing that justice isn't just about equal pay for equal work, but also about the equitable distribution of all forms of labor, including the unseen mental and emotional burdens. This realization was a profound shift in my perspective on what work truly entails. The pernicious nature of harmful stereotypes. The professor then brought up a crucial ethical point: how ideas about women's behavior have been twisted into harmful stereotypes. We talked about the insidious nature of labels like the overly emotional woman, the irrational female, or the manipulative wife. These aren't just inaccurate descriptions. They are often tools of oppression. They explained that these stereotypes are used to invalidate women's experiences, dismiss their arguments, and deny them agency. If a woman expresses anger, she's emotional. If a man does, he's passionate. If a woman strategizes, she's manipulative. If a man does, he's clever. This kind of epistemic injustice where someone is wronged specifically in their capacity as a knower distorts reality and reinforces existing power imbalances. It's a form of silencing, where the very act of speaking is undermined by preconceived notions of gender. The professor stressed that these stereotypes are not objective observations of behavior. Instead, they are deeply ingrained cultural narratives, often serving to maintain existing social hierarchies. Understanding this distinction is vital. It means we must actively challenge these narratives, recognizing them as products of prejudice rather than truth. They are not merely but actively constructed fictions designed to keep certain groups in power and others marginalized. This critical awareness is our first step in dismantling these harmful structures. Agency, determinism, and the problem of naturalness. Our discussion moved into a more abstract, but vital, philosophical territory. The tension between agency, our individual capacity to act freely, and determinism, the idea that our actions are determined by factors outside our control. The professor asked, to what extent are women's behaviors a result of their free choices? And to what extent are they shaped, or even determined, by societal pressures and historical contexts? They argued that while society undoubtedly shapes us, it doesn't entirely dictate us. Individuals can and do resist societal norms, challenging expectations and forging their own paths. However, the cost of resistance can be high, involving social disapproval, professional setbacks, or even personal isolation. This means that behaviors we observe might not always be purely free choices, but rather strategic choices made within constrained environments. It's not always a choice between good and bad behavior, but often between different strategies for survival or flourishing within a given system that limits options. This also tied into the problem of naturalness. The professor warned against immediately assuming that any observed difference in male and female behavior is natural or biological. While biology plays a role in our physical makeup, attributing complex social behaviors solely to biology often overlooks the powerful influence of socialization, culture, and power structures. They encouraged me to always ask, could this behavior be a learned response to a specific social environment, rather than an inherent unchangeable trait? This critical lens helps us avoid lazy assumptions and encourages deeper inquiry, preventing us from using biology as a convenient excuse for maintaining the status quo. It's about recognizing that what appears natural can often be deeply conditioned, beyond binaries. Embracing the full spectrum of humanity fully, the professor gently nudged me to consider the limitations of even the terms men and women themselves when discussing behavior. While useful for broader discussions, they are ultimately binaries that don't fully capture the rich spectrum of human identity and experience. They alluded to the importance of recognizing gender nonconforming individuals, transgender individuals, and the fluidity of gender identity, suggesting that understanding human behavior truly requires moving beyond rigid categories. The core message was this: human behavior is incredibly complex, multi-layered, and deeply intertwined with context, power, and individual agency. To reduce it to simple gendered categories is to miss the profound richness of human existence. The professor's point here was not to erase the categories, but to acknowledge their constructed nature and their limitations when applied rigidly to the diverse tapestry of human identity. It's about expanding our empathy and understanding to encompass all forms of human expression, a call to deeper inquiry. This conversation with the professor didn't just change my mind, it profoundly expanded my intellectual horizon and deepened my capacity for critical thought. It wasn't about finding simple answers, but about learning to ask better, more nuanced questions. So for all of you watching, I hope this deep dive encourages you to question generalizations. Whenever you hear broad statements about how men act or how women act, pause and ask, is this truly universal, or am I missing the incredible diversity of individual experience? Challenge the easy answers. Look for hidden power. Always consider the underlying power dynamics at play. How do societal structures and historical contexts influence the behaviors we observe and the values we place on them? Dig beneath the surface. Unpack social construction. Remember that many behaviors are learned and reinforced by society. They aren't fixed. They can evolve and be challenged. Recognize the powerful role of culture. Embrace nuance. The real journey of understanding lies in appreciating the unique complexities of every individual, moving beyond simple labels. Celebrate the multifaceted nature of humanity. This is just the beginning of the conversation, and I'm still processing so much of it. What are your thoughts on these ideas? Have you noticed these dynamics in your own life? Let me know in the comments below. Let's keep this important discussion going.